political landscape of the continent has always been extremely hostile throughout the many years since the conjunction of the spheres. Kings at each other's throats expecting to be stabbed in the back by other kings, northern kingdoms hating on other northern kingdoms because of lies they were told or actions of political figures, and even the southern empire of Nilfgaard taking over different areas to grab it and force it under their own rule. There are countless things happening all over, with many different wars affecting the landscape. However, at the same time, race relations were also extremely hostile. Humans and elves were at each other's throats all of the time, with dwarves, gnomes and halflings joining those same battles, with most believing the humans were extremely aggressive and were taking over the land by force, not thinking about other races they shared the land with. During this hostile time, one elven figure would rise to power and would become the face of the elven people living on the continent. This elf would be known to all as the most beautiful woman in the world by quite some margin, with even many humans believing that as well, with her long golden hair and her outfit of a grey-green dress decorated with lace which rustled frequently when she moved. With her blue elven eyes, this elf would be difficult not to look at, as she gave a look that was said to be inscrutable and hard as glass. This beautiful elf would eventually go on to be the queen and later duchess of the elves within their free state known as Dol Blathana, and would go by the elven name of Daisy of the Valleys, or in the common tongue, Francesca Findabair. So who is Francesca? What was her overall goal with the elves? What events was she a part of? And where is she now within the timeline? Well, in today's episode, we will be exploring the timeline of this incredibly beautiful and powerful elf on the continent and explain how she influenced all of the events around her. But before we do get into it, did you know you can also listen to these episodes through Spotify, Apple Music and other podcast suppliers completely free a day after these videos release? A lot of you requested an audio only version, so if you want to listen to some lore when out and about or before sleep, then whack on Spotify and search for my podcast Wise Fish's Lore Room for all of my lore episodes, with many being uploaded soon. Also, a 5-star review would really help them out massively. But anyways, with that out of the way, this is the story of Daisy of the Valleys. This is the story of the elven queen known as Francesca Findabair. After the conjunction of the spheres took place, many different races were flung together, forcing them into a new form of life. For a time before this, the elven people would thrive within this land, setting up their grand cities, running their political circles, and just tending to their land their own way. However, eventually humans entered the scene, landing on this famous continent and went on to meet with the elves. At first, the two races ignored each other, or if they did meet, got along pretty well, not wanting to start any wars and just build up their societies together. But after a while, the humans started taking up more and more land, and due to the lifespan differences between the two races, the human population would be growing more and more, overtaking the elves by quite some margin. After some time, the relationship between the elves and humans broke down, with many of the elven people believing humans were far too aggressive with their land acquisitions and resource gathering. Eventually, boiling point hit when a Redanian military officer known as Marshal Milan Raupanek objected to human children being taken to Lochmoin to be trained in magic, and sent his forces into the area, massacring the entire elven population there in a violent pogrom. This was to be a statement that humans were the dominant species on the continent, and everything elves did was to be shut down to make more land for the humans. With relations at an all-time low, war was brewing between the two races, and hatred for the humans was brewing amongst their society for what they had done to their people. For a young Francesca Findabair, she would hear about all of these atrocities happening to her people, but at this point in time never even considered the advantages of diplomacy, and instead believed the only form of action that could be taken was through direct action. The reason she believed this was because she saw it as the only way to ensure her race's survival against the extremely aggressive human expansion. This mindset was all helped by her father, who would state multiple times his utter distaste for the ape men who ruined the continent completely. But despite believing that, her father would not want to ever meet them on the battlefield and settle it with war. Instead, Francesca's father would go on to try and meet with their leaders and try and get a peace treaty signed with them. This did not sit well with Francesca at all. The humans had spilt too much elven blood and did not deserve forgiveness or to be left off the case. Hearing her father just give in to their demands was seen in Francesca's eyes as one of the most cowardly actions he could ever do, and in fact spat in the face of all of the elves who wanted to be free from the rule of these oppressive humans. Knowing that she could not sit back and watch her father go and speak to the humans themselves, Francesca would desperately try to change his mind and convince him not to speak to them, but in fact take up arms and fight them directly. Sadly for Francesca, this plan was to fail, as her father would outright dismiss her pleas and forbade his daughter from getting involved going forward. But obviously Francesca was not going to listen to him and his commands, and would immediately go against his wishes, believing that this was too big an issue to just stand back and watch from a distance. At this same time, another elf known as Elaren was setting up her own fight back against the humans, who shared the same sentiment as many of the elven population, that this issue was not to be settled through words and agreements, and instead could only be solved on the battlefield. Hearing the regular speeches given by Elaren, Francesca would be massively inspired, and it only went on to help her mindset going forward even more. With this affirmation, Francesca defied her father's orders, gave up her duties and role, and joined the Elven rebellion led by Elaren. With this rebellion all set up, the elves would go on to fight the humans and try desperately to take back the land that they had taken. But sadly, it was not enough. The elves were massively overwhelmed by the masses of human warriors and were slaughtered on the battlefield. The biggest issue with Elaren's plan was it only seemed to recruit the young, angry elves, with the elders like Francesca's father not believing this was the best solution. Because it was only the young elves, they really did not have the power to win the battle, and that was evident as they were killed in battle, with Elaren also being killed as well, meaning the rebellion was officially over. With most of the young elves being killed in this final battle, this played major consequences with the future of this race, as almost all of the remaining elves could not produce offspring, meaning their race was dying and they needed a big solution. Francesca, however, was one of the lucky few who was able to survive this battle against the humans, but it had cost her everything. She had lost most of her companions and realized it had not helped her. Her race was now in even more trouble than it was before she followed Elaren into battle. Venturing back to the elders of her society, her father was outraged at the damage she had caused to her people, and in response to everything she had done, he would go on to completely disown her, cast her out from his side, and stated that he would never speak to her ever again. Not all was lost for Francesca, however. Being at her father's side all of that time, she would witness his life as a powerful sage and learn a lot about what that consisted of. Because of this, Francesca also learned about the powerful gene that could shape the whole world, that being the Elder Blood gene. Being so well versed in the world of magic and knowing a lot about this unique gene, Francesca would go on to meet with a group of mages who were on the hunt for a sole individual who they were hired to hunt down by their employer, King Goidemar. This individual was one of the three Hultberg triplets, who the mages had to work out who were from the Redanian king Ridanx, born from Rhiannon, and who were born from a girl named Folkers. The reason for this task was there was a legend spoken about two individuals carrying the Elder Bloods. One would be the savior of the world, and another who was said to destroy it. The legend suggests that one who saved the world would be of Lara Doran descent, which in this case was Rhiannon, and the other who destroyed it would be from Folker's descent. Finding out which one was Folker's child would allow them to shut down the supposed destroyer of the world, as this legend suggests anyway. After impressing the mages with her knowledge of Elder Blood and the legends it tells of, Francesca would join this crew and start to try and figure out which girl was the one they were looking for. Eventually this team were able to discover that the girl in question was named Adela, who was the one born from Folka, who prior to this was labelled as criminally insane and burnt at the stake for starting a rebellion against her father and two half-brothers, Hiltmut and Denhard, as well as imprisoning Rhiannon in the fortress of Holberg. Eventually the team would go on to find this child of Folka, but this would come with a problem. The group of mages and Francesca realised she was just 2 years of age, and the order they had been given to execute the child did not sit right with any of them. Instead, the mages hid the truth from their employer King Goidemar about who the daughter really was, stating that they were unable to find out the truth, and with that said, King Goidemar dropped his goal of finding out who she was and never asked about it again. For Francesca and the mages, they had just saved the life of a 2-year-old and avoided a mass scandal that would have most likely spread across the whole of the continent. Later in life, information was found by Jacob Fenn of the firm Codringer and Fenn about these Horburg triplets, with the information stating it was not Adela that was Folka's daughter, it was in fact Fiona instead. However, with the mages not revealing the truth of what they had found during their time there, it is still unknown to this day what is the truth of it all, and Folka's true child is still a mystery that no one knows of or will ever know, with maybe the mages manipulating all of the documents to hide the child's identity to all. After that event, Francesca went quiet for a while, most likely spending her days with the mages of the continent, joining the Brotherhood of Sorcerers at some point, or just becoming an honoured guest with them anyway, because within 1263, the First Northern War had fully kicked off, with the Nilfgaardian army storming the whole of Sintra, killing their king and queen and their people in the process. Eventually, the Nilfgaardian army reached Sodden Hill, where they would face the full power of the mages of the Northern Realms known as the Brotherhood of Sorcerers, which included Francesca at this point. As the battle took place, many Nilfgaardian soldiers were killed in the process as they were forced back, being overwhelmed by the full power of the Brotherhood and the Northern Armed Forces. This battle was a huge turning point as Nilfgaard had gone into it with such confidence, but was outright humiliated by what was said to be 14 incredibly powerful individuals. And because of this defeat, Nilfgaard were forced to retreat, meaning the First Northern War was officially over and the North had won. With that said, the North was not exactly on agreeing terms, with many of the monarchs not agreeing with one another and the mages being seen as playing a lot of them for political gains. As things got heated throughout the North, Francesca became a full member of the chapter of the Brotherhood of Sorcerers within 1267, allowing her to become one of the main leaders of the group. But with politics getting more and more heated up in the North, Emperor Emir of Nilfgaard wanted to try and invade them again, but this time changed his plans up a little bit. Here Emir invited Francesca to meet with him and made her an offer that would be very hard for her to refuse. This deal was essentially if she were to help Emir and Nilfgaard take out the opposing mages who supported the North during one of their vital conclaves, she would be granted the title of Queen of the Elves and would be allowed to rule within the kingdom of Dol Blathana, making it a full elven state. With Francesca still with that grudge against the humans from all of those years ago, with her being on her own with not many of the elves left on the continent, she had to just go with the flow. But this was finally her opportunity to get that life she always wanted for herself, but also her dying people. It could also be said that within the Brotherhood itself, the attitude towards her and the elves was not always on the best of terms. Despite being high up in the rankings, the sole fact that she would listen to Emir's offer after everything she fought for in the First Northern War implies that Francesca was looking for something new so she could finally focus on her own race. After hearing Emir out, Francesca would go on to accept his offer and began making the plans to tear down the Brotherhood from the inside, taking out all of those who opposed Nilfgaard's rule. As the conclave began out within Thanedd Island, Francesca would team up with a fellow mage who also sided with Emir and his Nilfgaard forces, that man being Vilgefortz, who knew that this was their perfect opportunity to take out the northern sympathizers. As the meeting all started to take place within the tower that was blocked from any use of magic, Francesca went ahead and snuck some of her loyal elven followers who despised the humans of the continent into the cellar of the tower. These elves would name themselves as the Scoia'tael and would fight for her cause, knowing full well that if they were to succeed here in this task, they would be gifted their own safe haven to live in forever. With the Scoia'tael located beneath the hollowed island waiting for Francesca's call to action, the banquet took place with just one more sleep until the vital meeting with the attempt to bring all of the northern kingdoms together taking place. Whilst this banquet went ahead, Francesca would meet with her fellow mage of Yennefer of Vengerberg, who introduced her to her partner, the famous witcher Geralt of Rivia. All seemed like it was going to plan for Vilgefortz and Francesca. However, just before dawn, the northern supporters uncovered the plot to betray them and bring Nilfgaard into the mix, and took swift action to take it down. Immediately, the northern supporters went on to arrest Francesca and the rest of the Nilfgaard supporters and put them in cuffs. And with no magic being able to be used within the whole of the tower, there was no fighting back. Francesca had to just accept it for now. As the Archmistress of Aretuza, Tissaia de Vries, entered the scene, witnessing Francesca and other Nilfgaardian supporters in cuffs, she would go on to demand that they all be released, not realizing what was fully going on amongst them. Fellow mage Philippa Eilhart explained that they should not be released as they were all traitors who had sold themselves to the rule of Nilfgaard after being promised their own independent state. Tissaia questioned what was actually the truth in all of this, but was met with hostility as Francesca only spoke back in elder speech, stating she had nothing to say to humans. After that, the Nilfgaardian supporters were sent to be tried for treason and eventually would go on to be executed. But before that could go down, Yennefer would bring in her adopted daughter Ciri, who would reveal everything that had been going on behind their backs, and how the North were in fact framing Nilfgaard attacks to make sure they had an excuse to take themselves to war and wipe them out as an act of revenge. Seeing that the North had gone behind Tissaia's back, she would remove the seal that was stopping people from using magic and release the Nilfgaardian supporters, which would go on to trigger the whole of the coup planned by Francesca and Vilgefortz. With the fighting in full swing, Francesca would venture down to the basement of the tower and open up the cellar doors, letting in all of the Scoia'tael, who would start attacking all of the humans supporting the North, only adding more chaos to everything that was going on. Despite doing everything to make sure she won the battle for Emhyr and getting her independent state, Francesca did not fully agree with everything they stood for, and especially did not agree with some of the people she was fighting alongside, especially one individual called Rience, who during this coup had a personal vendetta against Yennefer after she had burned his face whilst repelling one of his attacks a few years back. Francesca didn't like the idea of Rience being able to extract that revenge, and in a change of character would go on to locate Yennefer herself and to make sure she survived not only the coup of Thanedd Island but Rience's attacks, used a spell named as Artifact Compression to enclose her in a jade shell, shrinking her as well so that she could then smuggle her off the island and away to safety. With both Francesca and Yennefer escaping the coup, the Brotherhood had officially dissolved, and with word spreading about what had happened during this conclave, all of the northern rulers distrusted the mages, banishing them from their side and alerting everyone to the dangers they bring. For Francesca though, she had done what she had set out to do, and her task for Emhyr was officially done. Venturing back to Nilfgaard, she would go on to speak to Emhyr, summarizing everything that had happened during the coup, and true to his word, Emhyr made her the official queen of Dol Blathanna, but with one condition. She would be the queen of the elves, but she would have to renounce the Scoia'tael, never helping them or their cause ever again. The sole reason for this was to make sure Emhyr could continue to use them to cause problems for the northern kingdoms, while he continued his own invasion. If they were to be a part of Francesca's Dol Blathanna society, they would have no need to fight anymore against the humans of the north, and suddenly Emhyr would be without his guerrilla fighters who could take out vital resources they needed to make that difference. With all of that settled, Francesca officially became the Queen of Dol Blathanna, the one and only independent free state for the elves. For the leader of the Enshe at the time, Filavandrel, he would go on to accept Francesca as their now queen, but also state that he wished she had agreed more land as part of the deal. But with that said, the elves did not have the resources to defend all of Dol Blathanna, so asking for more land would have been a bit of a task. Filavandrel decided it was time to bring home all of the elves, to allow them to finally be able to live in peace and stop living throughout the continent in fear, and to stop them fighting like common bandits. But Francesca explained that was not such an easy thing to do. She had agreed with Emhyr that the Scoia'tael was not welcome, as they had to be discarded by them, or Dol Blathanna would be taken from them. For the Vandrel, shocked by this claim, took his time to realize that this meant discarding his own people. The elves who had fought for their cause, the people who had got them to where they are now, were to be left behind and not part of their society anymore. After a while, Filavandrel accepted what had to be done and forgave Francesca for what she had ultimately agreed to, but also went on to tell her that he did not know if the rest of Elvenkind would ever be able to forgive her like he did. As time passed and Dol Blathanna was set up, Francesca continued her work with Nilfgaard, going on to meet with the Emperor's head of military intelligence, but during that meeting would also go on to notice an elven sage known as Ida Emen, who was hiding in the room out of the head of the military intelligence's sight. Speaking to her after the meeting, they would discuss the formation of a new group of mages that would be known as the Lodge of Sorceresses, that was started up by Philippa Eilhart several weeks after the coup of Thanedd Island took place to ensure the survival of magic throughout the land. Francesca had been personally sought out by Philippa and contacted via projection not long after she became queen, and was told she could attend the meeting in person and was permitted to bring 2 potential initiates to it. After discussing this meeting with Ida, Francesca finally decided it was the right time to decompress Yennefer a month and a half after she had cast a spell on her to invite her to it as well. And now she was back to being herself, Francesca would go on to explain to her that she was going to attend the lodge's next meeting, which was in just a few hours' time. Yennefer was having none of it, as she was massively irritated by the actions of Francesca and said she had other plans in mind. But Francesca hit back again, stating that if she attempted to run from her side or go against the lodge's wishes, she would compress her once again. With all of the sorceresses now having their meeting, tension was extremely high, especially after what had happened during the coup, with a lot not wanting to acknowledge Francesca or Yennefer, still thinking they were traitors of Nilfgaard. But it became clear to the others that the simple fact that they were there against Nilfgaardian knowledge and would be killed if they were found to be there, the others accepted this was to help the world of magic, and finally they were accepted in to discuss matters. As the first lodge meeting went ahead, Philippa revealed her true plans for them going forwards. That was to make sure there was a kingdom ruled by magic, and she had the perfect solution for it. That was through the use of Princess Cyrilla of Cintra, who possessed the Elder Blood gene. If these sorceresses were to locate Ciri, who had gone missing, they could marry her off to Tancred Thyssen, the king of the kingdom of Kovir and Povis, and solidify their kingdom of magic. Francesca, who was well versed in the knowledge of Elder Blood, as well as Ida, went on to explain to the rest of them everything they knew about the gene and how Ciri was linked to it, but forgot to take into account the hidden affairs and other such situations that could compromise who were the carriers of it. With that first meeting out of the way, the lodge was officially set up and would continue to have regular meetings. Francesca had become a loyal member of it, and their main ambition was to locate Ciri and create their kingdom. As many meetings went ahead, Francesca and the others would go on to hear about Fringilla Vigo's plan to keep Geralt busy within Toussaint, so they could continue their search for both Ciri and Vilgefortz as well. By early January of 1268, the location of Vilgefortz was revealed to them by Fringilla thanks to her work with Geralt. The women were able to track him down to Ryrun Castle, and with that now known, they would launch an attack on him to shut him down once and for all and retrieve Ciri as well. As the attack was launched on his hideout, Francesca would watch it through a magical image, but as the other women got there, they would find that the location was indeed false, and Geralt had indeed lied to them and got away from their grasp, allowing him to not reveal where Vilgefortz and Ciri were. With that failed task now over, attention turned to the Battle of Brenna, in which Nilfgaard had lost quite badly, leading to peace talks within Cintra to end what would have been the Second Northern War. As the peace talks went ahead, Francesca and the lodge would locate themselves in a room directly above the negotiations. After a while, the peace talks turned their attention to her independent state of Dol Blathanna, with King Demavend of Aedirn stating that he was finally happy to recognize its autonomy, not as a kingdom, but as a duchy, but would that had a few requests. The first being that it was to offer equal rights to both humans and elves, and the second that they would have to pay him liege homage. Francesca accepted all of the terms apart from paying him homage. Instead, she agreed to it being a freehold instead and only gave him an oath of loyalty, making sure he had no power above her or give him any way to walk all over her and her people. Months passed after the peace talks in Sintra and the end of the Second Northern War, and on the 1st of June, Francesca attended a lodge meeting once again. During this meeting, Philippa coerced Yennefer into having Ciri meet with all of the women in a last attempt to use her for their now slightly altered plans. Ciri, however, was not going to give in to them. She was far too independent to be ordered around by a group of intimidating sorceresses. If she was to help them and their cause, it was to be under her terms and her terms only. Ciri stated she would think about it, but before she did anything, she had to say goodbye to Geralt, her adopted father. The lodge, however, were apprehensive about letting her go to see the Witcher and immediately called a vote on if they should let her go or not. Francesca, however, didn't see it as that big of an issue and voted in favour of Ciri being able to leave, but didn't give a solid reason as to why. Throughout this whole meeting, Francesca was extremely kind and courteous to Ciri as one of their guests. However, she was not kind and courteous to Yennefer, who she showed complete hostility towards after she escaped the lodge back within their first ever meeting, back when Francesca threatened to compress her if she went against their wishes. With this grudge still lingering in the air, Francesca and the lodge all agreed that Yennefer would lose her rights to vote as she was not a true member of the lodge, and as a result of her actions, she would be sentenced appropriately but at a much later time. That sentence never came to be, however, as a few days later, after the meeting adjourned and Ciri had left the lodge to seek out Geralt, both him and Yennefer would find themselves in the middle of a Rivian pogrom, where the humans had started attacking and killing all non-humans, an event that was all triggered thanks to how bad things had gotten within the north after the Second Northern War. In this pogrom, Geralt would jump to the defense of the non-humans, but would be killed in the process, with Yennefer running to his aid trying to revive him, but also being killed as well. Ciri would go on to revive them eventually with the help of the powerful unicorn and transport them to the island of Avalak, meaning for Francesca and the lodge, any hope of finding Ciri, Geralt and Yennefer was harder than it had ever been before. And not only that, but Ciri was also getting more and more powerful by the day. If they were to get her to help with their goal, they would have to do it sooner rather than later. Ciri never did return to the lodge, most likely due to the events within the Rivian pogrom, and because of that, the lodge eventually fell, and quite significantly as well, with several of the sorceresses being thrown into dungeons, tortured, and ultimately executed for trying to plot behind the backs of the kings of the North and Nilfgaard. Not only that, but their traces were destroyed as well, such as their many portals and their chronicles, which were massively manipulated over time. It is unsure what happened to Francesca during this massive downfall of the lodge. However, it is said that within the late 1300s, she and the rest of the elves were fully gone from the world, with not so much as a painting of her left behind. It is said that all of the elves took everything in their possession, including those paintings, and ventured through a door and out of this realm to find their own new home away from the chaos of the continent. Maybe somewhere out there, Francesca Findabair still rules as queen of her people, and maybe she has led them to paradise where the elves can flourish once again. Maybe she will return to the continent to once again meet with people like Kira Mentz, Philippa Eilhart and Yennefer, or maybe this will be the last we've ever seen of Francesca, the queen of the elves who brought about a sea of chaos during her time, fighting for the rights of the elves of the continent. But for now, this has been the story of the one the elves call the Daisy of the Valleys. This has been the story of the powerful queen of the elves, Francesca Findabair. I want to say a big thank you for watching this video and a huge thank you to my patrons who allow me to make them on a regular basis, including my small fishes, my big fishes, Anthony, Arto Krem, Christopher, Greg, and Last Persona User, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Video Game Player 75, Ico the Wolf, Sith Lord 906, A Frosty Vodka, Tomb of Ash, and Fiery Italian, my Sharks Jason X117, Alfred Correa, and Whale Search Gaming, and my Megalodons, Chernobyl Stalker, Hazy Thoughts, Rhoda C, and Sinus. But that is all for now. Thank thank you for watching again. If you want to support this channel, all the links are down below where you can get early access and screenshots of my footage collected, as well as some merch as well. And if you want more lore videos, check out my playlist below, and also check out my audio only versions of these episodes on your selected podcast app, such as Spotify and Apple Music. And if you do, please do like, comment and subscribe to help get them out there. And finally, with all of that said, I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.